If knowledge can create problems, it is not through ignorance we can solve them. This quote by Isaac Asimov has become one of my personal favorites. In recent years, and arguably throughout much of human history, there has been attacks on not just freedom of speech, but the very idea of sharing information for constructive, recreational, educational, scientific, and otherwise productive applications. The only known solution to error is criticism. And today I'm mostly going to be talking on technology and science, but you can see the political and economic applications and implications of this, I hope. I'd like to cover a few topics that have been in the news in recent years, and a few in recent weeks, at least as of this recording. The first one is 3D printing and guns. The second one is going to be biotech. The third one is the idea of open source medical devices and the right to repair. Okay, some of you might be familiar with the 3D printed firearm, a plastic pistol released by a group called Defense Distributed almost a decade ago. There was a lot of fear-mongering about this, mostly by people who know nothing about 3D printing and nothing about firearms. 3D printing typically uses plastics, ones without much material strength. Yes, I know there are stronger plastics, composites, and metal printing, but for the most part, these are still fairly rare and expensive. And someone looking to make a firearm for illicit use can quite easily make one out of scrap metal, as has been done for most of the 20th century. Now, even the defense-distributed firearm is not that impressive or intimidating in terms of firearms. Furthermore, it is not the first non-metallic firearm. Flare guns, typically used to signal distress or communicate over long distances, are common among boaters, long-distance truckers, pilots, and other groups that might need to communicate over long, unpopulated stretches. Second, there is the forerunner of both fireworks and firearms, an old Chinese invention that would basically be a fire lance or fire tube, a piece of bamboo packed full of gunpowder and pellets of various types. That would be like a jet of flame, kind of a mini early shotgun, but it did not have the power of anywhere approaching even a modern shotgun. The third case is potato cannons, often used by physics enthusiasts and teachers. Now, if you don't know what a potato cannon is, I invite you to look them up. They're generally a small combustion or pneumatic cannon made out of PVC pipe or something similar, sometimes using a small amount of gas like MAP gas or butane to launch a small projectile like a Nerf dart or a piece of potato, as the name goes, a appreciable distance. I've met a couple of teachers from humble areas, shall we say, that have used these as great ways to get kids interested in science, especially physics and chemistry. Some of the combustion potato cannons are technically firearms in the sense they use an explosion to launch something, but it's more comparable to model rockets than modern smokeless powder. Yet, under certain countries' laws, these are counted as firearms for all legislative purposes. Yet, they're still made worldwide as a hobbyist and physics project by a lot of amateur scientists. The reason I'm bringing this up is that in recent years, certain places, such as the state of New Jersey, have passed laws that criminalize sharing information that might be used to produce a plastic firearm or a non-metallic firearm. Now, these were primarily knee-jerk reactions to the Defense Distributed design, which was largely a piece of political theater. Yet, almost any book on military science or chemistry, physics, you name it, could technically count under this law. Now, the Defense Distributed design still uses metal parts to fire, so technically it is not fully plastic. It is a whole lot of fear-mongering by people who know nothing about the area. yet they are passing laws that can adversely affect a whole lot of citizen scientists around the world. They don't care because a lot of politicians, again, are driven by ego and special interest. Instead of, say, writing logical, well-defined legislation aimed at a particular topic, they're content to just write some sloppy piece of trash and ram it into law as quickly as possible for political points. Yet, that's just one example. We haven't covered encryption, digital currency, drugs, or much more contentious topics later on. Now, on to biotechnology. Keep in mind that in order to synthesize something, you need to perform things like polymerase chain reaction and a whole lot of other steps. There's a whole community of do-it-yourself basement geneticists called biohackers. And the potential for biohacking to really cut down on things like drug prices or gene therapy, or much more mundanely, make genetics a lot more accessible to disadvantaged communities and amateur scientists is very strong. Some politicians have expressed fears about posting things like the genomes of various viruses or drug-resistant bacteria online could enable some disgruntled geneticist to produce a basement bug or doomsday virus, like bring back smallpox or make super anthrax. But trying to prevent the scientific community from publishing this sort of thing makes the problem much, much worse. Because, like Chernobyl, the cover-up made the disaster a lot worse than it originally was. That's why I believe having a robust community of citizen scientists, of biohackers, do-it-yourself geneticists is much better than a clueless group of political morons and some of the special interests behind them. I'm going to touch on this third topic briefly, but it is very much a matter of life and death. Recently, there's been a ventilator shortage around the world for patients infected with the coronavirus. There have been stories of people trying to reverse engineer hospital ventilators to try and make their own or retrofit them for rapid use. There have even been open source ventilators made from scratch as an alternative to them. People shouldn't have to worry about getting sued from the manufacturer for working with their own property, yet what is called the right to repair. The idea of ownership of a device, of software, of a platform, has been attacked by various companies. Not just medical ventilators, but ones like farm equipment manufacturers, like John Deere tractors. And that's before we get into electronics with planned obsolescence, like Apple products. The right to exchange information, the right to experiment, the right to explore. I'm not only talking about the United States and Europe here. Even in other countries, you can see the effects of a lack of protection for freedom of press and freedom of speech and freedom of expression. The Australian Federal Police raided 2 media companies a couple of years ago over the potential publication of war crimes by military forces in Afghanistan under national security grounds. Even in New Zealand, in 2014, a journalist, Nikki Hager, published a book called Dirty Politics about a very minor political scandal. The Prime Minister of the time allegedly using bloggers to attack his political opponents, that started a series of complex events that involved the police raiding the journalist's home and even the intelligence services of New Zealand spying on him. This was all illegal in New Zealand under the Bill of Rights Act, yet politicians still felt comfortable abusing their power in such a way. And that's just a small country like New Zealand. We haven't even touched cases of modern whistleblowers or journalists getting attacked because of their work. Now, I can understand certain circumstances where restrictions on information make sense. For example, the identities of undercover officers infiltrating terrorist groups or gangs. the specifications of military hardware, the schematics of things like nuclear bombs or stuff of high strategic importance. Yet, I would argue that under a lot of circumstances, scientific illiteracy can create a certain institutional momentum that keeps bad laws going longer than they should. Some of the cases I brought up earlier, biotech, potato cannons even, these are just examples of what happens when the public is not largely aware of science, of technology, and how they've traditionally been applied. Lamentably, there are some cynical people who benefit from keeping things that way. That, friends, is why if you see someone asking you to restrict information, ask them why. Because if knowledge can create problems, it is not through ignorance we can solve them.